Breaking overnight, we learned that the Wyoming Republican Party, its Central Committee, voted to no longer consider Congresswoman Liz Cheney a member of the party. The decision all stems from Cheney's efforts to hold Donald Trump accountable for his role in the insurrection on January 6th. The news broke in the Casper Star-Tribune. The vote was 31-29. Joining me now, New York Times Washington correspondent and CNN political analyst Maggie Haberman. We're talking about Liz Cheney. If you step back, Liz Cheney, daughter of Dick Cheney, but in her own right, a conservative stalwart, basically being thrown out of the party because she won't stand by one person.
Yeah, and look, when the argument by Kevin McCarthy was that you can't have a member of leadership who's criticizing leadership when Cheney was in leadership, that, a lot of people objected to it, but there was more logic to that made some sense. This is basically, you're not a Republican if you don't favor Donald Trump. And that is something that we have not seen before. That is something different. And the more that you see this spread through the party, the harder it is going to be for anyone trying to challenge Trump in any way going forward.
That's not democracy, small d. I mean, that's the politics of one person, one man. That's not something we see in the U.S.
No, it's not something we see in the U.S. You don't generally see people. This is not how the two-party system works. It's not about pledging fealty to one person. And look, it is interesting that the vote was as split as it was. I actually thought
what
it was
about
gonna be worse
What
than
about that? Because that's 31-29 isn't a landslide for Trump. That shows a near majority of Republicans in this state willing to say this is stupid.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who actually are willing, certainly privately, I've talked to them, you've talked to them, who will say, this is a mistake, this is not the road we should go down. There have been fewer of them who are willing to put their names to it. And so the fact that, I don't know if this was a secret ballot or how this was conducted, but the fact that there are people, at least in numbers, who are willing to oppose this does mean it speaks to something we are seeing. There are people in the party who are uncomfortable with this drift toward supporting this one person over everything else.
We're going to come back to that in just a second because I want to hit what's happening with Steve Bannon first. Now arraigned on charges of contempt of Congress, he came out afterwards and said, this is basically the best thing that ever happened to me. Let's listen.
This is going to be the misdemeanor from hell for Merrick Garland, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden. The administrative state wants to take me on, bring it. Because we're here to fight this, and we're going to go on offense. And you stand by.
Okay, A, what's he doing here?
So he's clearly having the time of his life to some extent, turning this into a circus, right, and turning this into some effort to be a martyr. Normally, you don't see a defendant say things like that right after some kind of an arraignment. You see the lawyer talk, and it's more restrained. His lawyer has been talking, but Bannon is using this to galvanize support for Bannon, as Bannon often does.
David Schoen, by the way, will be on the show later talking to Brianna. I understand you've got reporting on whose idea it was to get him. And he was one of Trump's impeachment lawyers in February, second impeachment lawyers, whose idea was it to get him connected to Bannon.
So I don't know specifically whose idea it was. I do have reporting that Trump asked Schoen to get involved in this, and that Schoen said yes. And I think it's a logical step that Schoen, who did Trump's impeachment, the second one, would not have been involved if Trump had not wanted him to. But that Trump is giving him this nudge and asking him to take the case tells you where Trump's head is in terms of Bannon. Trump issued a statement. Trump, we should just note, over 4 years has been all over the map on Steve Bannon. And so, more recently, he has turned into a supporter of his, as Bannon has been more vocally supportive of Trump. And so I think that is what you're seeing. What it means for the privilege fight, I don't think we can take a guess at that, but I do think people read into that.
All right, how much time we got? Because I want to know if I can play the full. Okay, Chris Christie. I want to play a little sound of Chris Christie talking to Dana last night. Dana Bash did a special about Chris Christie, what he's thinking. Will he run? Would he take on Trump? Play a little bit of sound from that.
With all due respect, that sounds like a cop-out.
I know. I'm sure you think it's a cop-out. But you know what? I also know that there's no reason to create tumult in a party that already has a lot of tumult in it.
All right. The question there was, would he take on Donald Trump if Trump ran for president? And he dodges the question. What's most interesting to me about Chris Christie isn't about Christie himself. It's the idea that he's willing to an extent to directly criticize Donald Trump. And it makes me wonder now whether something has changed over the last few weeks where there are serious Republicans, and say what you want about Chris Christie, but he's a serious Republican, who think there's an avenue now to take him on.
Yeah, or at least to not necessarily take him on directly for themselves in terms of running, but at least to confront what he's been saying and what he represents in terms of the party going forward. I interviewed Chris Christie recently as well. He made some very similar points, but what he did say to me was that the victory in Virginia by Glenn Youngkin, and the fact that New Jersey's gubernatorial race was as close as it was, those are two blue states, shows you, not entirely the same, but they're still blue states, shows you there is some window for people who want to talk about issues as opposed to just talk about Donald Trump and the things Donald Trump wants to talk about. And that was very much the vein in which he was speaking.
If it's just Chris Christie, that's one thing. But if it's Christie,
that's right,
and then someone else,
that's right,
and then someone else, it's another. And as they perceive Joe Biden, whose approval rating is not good right now, perhaps to be weakened, it makes me wonder if they think they don't need Donald Trump. If that's a hassle they may not need or want to deal with going forward to 2024.
I think we are a ways away from actual voters getting to that point, but I do think that there are a lot of people who remain very tired and exhausted by the Trump years among Republicans, not necessarily Trump's hardest core base. But look, I think being off Twitter has actually been a blessing for Trump because it means his statements are not in everybody's face all the time and they get to tell themselves it's not really that bad. You and I who get his statements know exactly what he's still saying, and it's just the same as it was when he was on Twitter. I think that the more people get a reminder of Trump and his conduct, and I think that you will see that when there's a report by the January 6th committee, which there will be, I think you will have reminders of why people got tired by the end.